Welcome to your Wednesday news and notes. I've got a couple of free selections for you. As always, give you a little look around the Phil Steele site, the Phil Steele Plus site, show you how to use it. Great information, college, FBS, FCS, NFL, and also give you the notes going through a lot of things this week. I go through every game, usually twice, and come up with some interesting tidbits for you. And let's start off with this interesting tidbit. You know, my knee-jerk reaction would be if Alabama loses a football game. I love to play on strong teams that rarely lose the very next week after they lose a football game. To me, it makes a lot of sense. And I was just going to automatically knee-jerk right to Alabama over Mississippi State this week. Coming off that loss last week, you got to figure they will have no holds barred this week, especially with only Western Carolina on deck. Now, one of the advantages of the Phil Steele Plus site is you can go back to the last 40-plus years and get the results. It takes you all the way back to 1976, which we're not going to need here. But if you ever wanted to go back to 1976 and get the spreads that are there, and also from right here, if you look from 2003, we started including the over-unders. That's when totals really came around. We've been here quite some time, and naturally I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars producing this site and updating it and making sure all these stats are current and accurate. But back here in 1998, they didn't even have totals. About 2000, they started to put a few totals on the marquee games, and then 2003 is when totals became pretty much on every game. So that's why we have the totals there, but not back in 96, 97, 98. If you're too young to remember, they didn't have totals on every game back then. It was a rarity. The second thing is we also give you these halftimes, which I find fascinating. Like here, the Auburn game, you can see Alabama led in 2004 6-0 at the half, lost the game 13-21. It's all there on every game. And if you do want to go back and research games like that, you can go all the way down the line here, take games all the way back. I believe this box score should be updated. Let's take a look at this Auburn box score here. You can see it. Alabama led 24 to 7 at the half and ended up losing 28-27. Actually, it was 24-0, and then Auburn got a touchdown right here with 5:08 left in the second quarter for their score, and then they made a big comeback. So that's all available at your fingertips in every game. Just click on the box if you want to get the box for the game. Click on the team name, like, for example, here, Alabama this week is playing Mississippi State. So if you go here and click on Mississippi State, boom, the last 22 years matchups come up. So you can see that Alabama's won. These are color-coded green and red, so you can tell at a glance that Alabama has won the last 11 in a row straight up in the series. And then if you want to know how they've done against the spread, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 4. If you want to know how the home team does, the wins and losses here in the home team category, the win means that they won straight up. The color green means they covered. The color red means they didn't cover. So you can tell that the home team in this series is actually 7-2 straight up the last 9, 9-3 straight, or 9-3 ATS the last 12, and that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, naturally 7-6 straight up because Alabama's won all these games. So they've won all their road games here. So it's more relevant to know what it is against the spread in this series. And in this case, 9-3 the last 12. Not bad against the spread. But let's go back here and talk about Alabama off a loss. And we're going to click on the last 40 years results. And when we go there, we take a look at the recent losses. And this is regular season losses, naturally, we want to take a look at, and then how they did. Or even here, they lost to Auburn. There's their loss to Auburn in 2017. Very next week, they came back and beat Clemson, as you would expect, 24-6. Not the next week. It was in a bowl game. It was weeks later, but they were still off a loss and came out there and won the game. Now, in 2016, let's see if they lost a game in here. No losses in that one. 2015, they were 14-1, so they lost somewhere along the way. Here it was. They lose to Mississippi. The next week, you would have expected them to pound ULM. They were minus 38. They only won by 34, so did not cover. That means they're 1-1 off a straight-up loss in the regular season. Here they lose to Mississippi. They're going to pound Arkansas, right? Well, actually, no. They were minus 9, and they only beat Arkansas by 1. So that's 1-2 against the spread off a loss during the regular season, which I found surprising when I was looking at this, when I was going through the matchup for this week. I expected to see big numbers. Here they lose to Texas A&M. Now, they beat Western Carolina 49-0, but the spread was 50. 1-3 against the spread off a loss. This, once again, surprising. They lose to LSU. Next week they play Mississippi State. Well, Vegas knows that Alabama's off a loss. So the spread's 17.5 on the road. They win by 17. And they do not cover. That's 1-4 against the spread off a loss. And see if we had another one in here. Nope. But anyway, they are 1-5 ATS off a straight-up loss. But the beautiful thing about the Phil Steele Plus site, you can click on this for all the teams, the last 40 years' results. As an example, you want to go to a team like Air Force, for example. Let's see their last 40 years' results. Takes you all the way back to 1976. Lines on every game. You can see there was quite a few games that weren't even lined back in the 80s. And then here's lines on every single game for Air Force. Here's their coach, who their coach has been, who their conference rankings have been, their stats. Really a super valuable tool, and something we've been compiling since 1976. Gone back and compiled all those stats, logged them in there, and they're there for every single team. So do make sure you use that when you're doing your own handicapping during the week and the season. I think you'll find it extremely valuable. I also have start charts. This tells you who's been starting in each game. So as you could tell, their right tackle has started every game. Here, they lost their right guard, it looks like, for 4 games. They moved their center over to fill that vacancy at right guard and plopped Mitchell in at center. Laufenberg started them all, and Ferguson started them all. So they've had one injury on the offensive line, or one replacement on the offensive line, and that's how they've gone on the course of the year. And we'll update this after the season in red. We'll note the red for the injured starts, lost, and it's a valuable tool there. But this gives you an idea of the health of each team. So you could take a look at some teams that are really beat up on the offensive line and overall. Let's get to another thing here to take a look at. Northwestern this week is laying 39 points to UMass. And you're probably thinking to yourself, how can Northwestern, which is scoring 11 points per game, lay 39 points to anybody? And the answer would be, I'll give you the reasons why they're laying that amount of points. Now, first of all, UMass played another Big Ten team that struggles against Big Ten play. They played Rutgers early in the season. Click on the team page, go to the Big Ten, and we're going to go to Rutgers. Now, look at how Rutgers has done in Big Ten play. 188 yards per game, 4 points per game. But when they played UMass, they put up 548 yards, 48 points. Now, Northwestern's in Rutgers category here, 264 yards per game, 9 points per game. But now they're taking on this UMass defense. Let's go take a look at UMass's defense. We all know that they're one of the weakest teams in the FBS, but look at how the yards they're giving up on the ground. The 290, almost 300 yards per game on the ground, 6.4 yards per carry, 68% through the air. They've had 8 sacks all year. They give their opponents, let me slide it over here so we can see this a little bit better. They give their opponents 227 yards above what they come in averaging. So here, Northwestern should get 500. And if you're looking for an offense that may have started to do something, 435 yards last week against Purdue. You look at all these numbers, they didn't even top 265 yards, 435. So maybe the offense starting to come on. If you are Northwestern's offensive coordinator and you have a season like this where you're averaging 278 yards per game and 11 points per game and your offense starts moving the ball, you think they're going to try to stop? So I like that. And the other factor and this is not an official play, it's just my thoughts on the game. When you look at Massachusetts against Rutgers, they only lost that game by 27. And here they're getting 39. The difference would be the defense. Now, we've seen that Northwestern has a slightly better offense than does Rutgers, but there really is no comparison defensively. Northwestern this year actually holding opponents to 66 yards per game below their season average. Rutgers given 39 yards above. Rutgers 431 yards per game on the year, 5 yards per carry. Northwestern plays good D, 348 yards. So unlike Rutgers, who they lost to by 27, Northwestern has a defense. Their offense will score. That's why Northwestern's laying 39 in that game. So I think Northwestern's got a shot at covering that, even though you would look at it off the cuff and say, how could a team that hasn't even scored 30 points in a single game this year be a 39-point favorite? Take a look at another game. This one just caught. I thought Texas State had been playing pretty good football this year. You look at some of their games. Now, granted, they beat Georgia State. That was a good game for them. Georgia State's a pretty doggone good team. Nicholls State, they beat by 21. South Alabama, they beat by 2. They did need South Alabama to miss a field goal at the end of the game, but they were competitive against ULM. So I thought overall they've been playing decent this year. The thing that surprised me, they're 0-7-1 against the spread versus FBS teams. They did cover against Nichols, but they haven't covered it against any other FBS team this week. Last week they were more than a 2-point favorite against South Alabama. They were more than a 3-point favorite against Georgia State. So I haven't covered a single game. I do think their head coach, Jack Spavital, is doing a good job there. I think Texas State's been competitive, but it surprised me when I saw 0-7-1 against the spread, and it's accurate. That's what it is on the year. So I just thought I'd bring it up. Now, another game I want to touch on, something you may not know. You go to the Mountain West Conference. We're going to take a look at Boise. Now, this week they're playing New Mexico. And once again, this is not an official play. Just some stuff I thought I'd point out for you on the game that I uncovered when I was doing that. Now, first of all, I turned on the TV last week. Well, naturally, I've got the TVs on. I flipped the station, I should say, on the TV to the Boise State game. And the first thing I learned is that our quarterback, Hank Bachmeier, is not going to play. He's an unexpected scratch. Even the announcers did not expect him to not play. Chase Cord started. Take a look at how Chase Cord starts. 25 points and 20 points. They've averaged 22.5 points in Chase Cord starts. Now, when Bachmeier starts, they're averaging 39 points per game. But Bachmeier didn't play last week, and that was part of the reason that Boise struggled against Wyoming, was they had their backup quarterback in. Remember, the last time they had their backup quarterback in, they lost outright to BYU. So that was a little bit of a struggle. And then the other thing to point out, first of all, we don't know if Bachmeier's going to play. I mean, they could say all week long he might play, but what if he's an unexpected scratch again? The second thing I'd say is, New Mexico's a horrible team, right? They just haven't won a game all year. They're not getting blown out. They lost by 11 to San Jose, 14 to Colorado State, 13 to Wyoming, 14 to Hawaii, and 11 to Nevada. So their average loss this year is by 12 points per game. They haven't lost a game in Mountain West play by more than 14 points all season long. They're only minus 69 yards per game in Mountain West play. So as much as you might want to think, hey, Boise State's going to blow out a winless New Mexico's playing better than their record would indicate. And like I said, the Bachmeier situation, if you have Boise and all of a sudden they say Bachmeier's not playing again, you may just be in trouble because they're laying almost 4 touchdowns in that game. Another quarterback injury to point out from last week was one you might not know, and that was in the Georgia State game. Now, Dan Ellington, as you know, last year Ellington was a leading rusher, leading passer. He's very dynamic. He's a huge part of this Georgia State offense, which rolls up a lot of yards, a lot of points. Well, last week, they put up 31 points against ULM, but if you look at it closer, they put up 24 points in the first half. In fact, if we go to I don't have the drive-by drives here, but if you go to the drive-by drives, Ellington was in the game for 5 series as the quarterback. They had 24 points in his 5 series. They went to a backup quarterback because he got injured at the end of the first half. And their backup quarterback, Cornelius Brown, who is more of a pocket passer than a runner like Ellington is, and definitely not the same type of passer that Ellington is. So you're weaker in passing and much weaker in running without Dan Ellington in the lineup. In Brown's 7 possessions, they had 1 touchdown. So 24 points in 5 possessions for Ellington, 7 points in 7 possessions for Brown. And late in the game, I was scratching my head a little bit. Sean Elliott, the coach for Georgia State, if you look here, there was 5 minutes to go in the game. They had all 3 timeouts, and they're down by 7. He opts to go for it on 4th and 8 with his backup quarterback at his own 28-yard line. You see this 28-yard drive for ULM for a touchdown? Really scratching my head there because you punt the ball, you're going to get the ball back, and if you use your timeouts, which you didn't even have to, there's 5.5 minutes to go in the game, you probably get the ball back with like 2:46 left in the game, and they basically gave ULM the ball at the 28-yard line. ULM punched in another touchdown and clinched it at that point. Very questionable to go for it on 4th down and 8 at your own 28-yard line or wherever it was at the end of the game. All right, let's get to a couple of plays this week. We're going to start out, you know what, before I get to the plays, we'll hold the good stuff for a minute. I do want to show you some of the stuff that is available on philsteele.com. If you go to the NFL info here, it's got it right up here, like the NFL strength of wins, pain of losses. Nope, that's last week's. Let me get to this week's. NFL info, and I'll show you what I'm clicking on over here. There you go, NFL info. We're going to go to strength of wins, pain of losses. It may surprise you, the Green Bay Packers have defeated. Now, if you're unfamiliar with strength of wins, pain of losses, you get a count. If you defeat a team, you get credit for every win that team has. If you lose to a team, you get credit for every loss that team has. Well, Green Bay actually has the most wins, 38. Now, they're not playing overwhelming football. One thing I wanted to point out about Green Bay, if you go to their NFL page here, is that the Green Bay Packers actually being outgained on the year. They're minus 29 yards per game. Great record, a lot of close games, fortunate in some of them, but they've beat the teams they've beaten have got a lot of wins, so that's pretty impressive. New Orleans 33, Seattle 29, and then here's your pain of losses here. If you go down below, you look at the teams at the top. Naturally, San Francisco's up there. They only have the one loss all year, and that was to Seattle, a team with 2 losses, so they have a credit for 2. New England's only got 1 loss. It was a team with 2 losses. They have a credit for 2. So here's your teams at the top, and here is, of course, your teams at the bottom. You know, an interesting one to look at this week may be San Francisco and Arizona. San Francisco's got a record of 25-2 in the strength of wins, pain of losses, and Arizona has only beaten teams that have beaten 4 teams. So their wins have not been over juggernauts. Meanwhile, they've lost to teams that have lost 17 games this year. They're towards the bottom of the standings. San Francisco towards the top. San Francisco could easily have won the Monday night game, and now they're off a loss. So what the heck? I would look at San Francisco, not an official play, but something when you're looking at this chart, you could come up with selections like this and say, hey, that looks like a pretty good deal. And same thing when you look at, go to the NFL and the yards per game. Once again, we'll click here on the NFL, not the NFL team page. We'll go to the home page, and we'll go to NFL info, and we'll go to NFL yards per game right here. Once again, San Francisco, Arizona pops up. San Francisco is actually number 1 in the NFL in games in yards against opponent averages. Their defense holding opponents to 99.8 yards below their season average, and their offense getting 10.4 points per game more than the season average. Add the two together, it's 110. They're number 1. You can look down here. Arizona's actually minus 58.8 against opponent averages. 2 more teams you might want to look at. How about the LA Rams? They're up here at number 6. They're at home. They're playing Chicago. Chicago is down here at number 5 below. They're minus 73.6 yards per game against opponent averages. Meanwhile, the LA Rams are plus 54.1. And the third one would be Dallas-Detroit. Now, you know, Dallas has lost quite a few games this year. They've lost games where you're scratching your head a little bit about what their record is. But I'm going to take a look at Dallas real quick. Click on the Dallas Cowboys. They've lost 4 games this year, so they're only 5-4. But look at their yards per game. They're plus 80.6 against opponent averages. That's even better than the New England Patriots, which are at 74.2. And Dallas this week is playing Detroit. Now, I've been picking on Chicago all year, but Chicago played a team that was down at their same level last week. Detroit didn't have their quarterback, and they beat them. Detroit's quarterback questionable. You never know what the line's going to come out. But Dallas towards the top, Detroit towards the bottom. You might want to take a look at that this week. We, of course, have colleges as well. When you go to the college page, you can go to, let's go back to the home page. And we'll click on the college FBS info here. And when you do that, you can click on the strength of wins, pain of losses, or else the blogs are right here as well. But here is your, let's go to the opponent averages first. Number 1 of the opponent averages. Now, once again, this does not include FCS games, or else everybody would have great averages if they played one. But Ohio State is beating their opponents by an average of 385 yards per game. Defense holding foes to 185 below, offense averaging 200 above. Clemson's right behind them at 304.1. Wisconsin may surprise you. I know they've lost a couple games this year, but even like the Illinois game, they outgained Illinois, and the Ohio State game, if you look at what they did against Ohio State's averages, they had probably some of the best numbers against Ohio State this year, so they're towards the top. LSU, which has beaten 4 top 10 teams at the top. Oklahoma up here, Georgia, Alabama, Utah, plus 193.2. How about Iowa State? Rather sneaky up here. Auburn, Navy is up there, Michigan. So you might find that interesting. When you go to the bottom, the teams at the very bottom are the ones you'd expect to be down there. See if there's any bowl teams down here. Maryland is a team that was thought to be going to a bowl. They're minus 101. Syracuse, same thing. They're minus 94.6 against opponent averages. This is updated every week, usually up here on Monday. And the other one would be college strength of wins, pain of losses. Let's go take a look at that one. And strength of wins, pain of losses, there it is. Ohio State comes up number 1. They've beaten teams that have beaten 42 FBS foes. Now, if you beat an FCS foe, it doesn't count. So if you got 6 wins and one's against an FCS foe, then Ohio State beats you. Ohio State only gets credit for 5 wins. So 42. LSU naturally right up there at 41. But look at this. Minnesota and Penn State each at 32. The Ducks at 31. Georgia at 31. Surprising, Alabama down here at 24. They've only beaten teams that have won a total of 24 FBS games this year. So that's a little bit on the surprising side. All right, I promised you a couple of plays. Oh, one other note, just because I would forget to tell you, up here all week long, I update all the injuries. I'm always scanning the wire, looking at all the things. I was going to write in my Inside the Press Box write-up, check out if Kelly Bryant's going to play. Here's the article. Kelly Bryant expected to play for Missouri against Florida. It's right up here. Nevada lost a wide receiver. Edwards is optimistic that Jaden Daniels is going to come back. It's at Phil Steele 042. Post interesting stuff like that. Vanderbilt gets quarterback Riley Neal back. Just check it out every week or every day. You really should, because I'm checking all the injuries every day. Here's how UAB's first-time starting quarterback did last week. Answer, not very good. Texas, a guard is not going to play against Kansas State this week. Who's going to be what's the Mississippi State quarterback situation? Left tackle for Louisville listed as day-to-day heading into the game. That could be big because they've given up a lot of sacks this year. NC State's got a lot of sacks. Kansas lost a safety for the season. Dan Ellington, that injury was huge last week for Georgia State, as mentioned. And so this is up there. Just scroll down, get all the latest injury information. It's up there. And guess what? It's free. It's at Phil Steele 042. And that's on Twitter. All right, let's get to your two free plays. And the first one we're going to take a look at, it does involve an FCS team. We're going to take a look at Alabama State. Now, who's Alabama State playing? Well, don't worry. It involves an FBS team. We're going to take a look at Florida State. And here's something that I found interesting. Now, the first thing I looked at is my computer forecast for the game. My computer forecast is Florida State winning this game 49 to -7. Now, you can't score -7. So I usually, what I do in that case, I add the 7. So that would be Florida State by about 56 points. If you look at the average game grades, Florida State's 41 points better, plus the home edge, that's 44. The spread's only 40.5. I know 40.5 seems like a large number, but one thing I want to impress upon you is Odell Haggins, Florida State's head coach now. They got a big win last week against Boston College, 524 yards. But remember, he was the interim head coach 2 years ago. They played ULM. I got to be honest with you. I had ULM in that game. I thought Florida State, interim head coach, straggling around, ULM in a good situation, and guess what happened? 42 to 10. And here's the thing. Go to the fourth quarter. Higgins is putting on touchdowns. It was 28-10 after 3 quarters. They scored here, and they scored here, and they got the cover. Florida State covered the game 42 to 10. And that was against a ULM team that's clearly a few notches up ahead of Alabama State. We'll talk about Alabama State in a minute. Then the bowl game. You look at the bowl game against Southern Miss. Once again, heading in the fourth quarter, it's 33-13. You're thinking USM might have a chance of getting a backdoor cover. Nope. Florida State puts a touchdown on, puts a field goal on. So in his 2 previous games as a head coach, Florida State scored 14 and 10 points in the fourth quarter while shutting out their opponent. And let's take a look at the Boston College game from this past week. Fourth quarter was 17-14, but that's a different story. Boston College, a completely different team. So that's something to look at. You know that Higgins will be trying to play 4 full quarters, which you got to like if you're a 40.5 point favorite. You also have got weapons like Tamarind Terry's averaging 20.1 per catch. Cam Akers, who could have a Heisman Trophy type of day here. Not that he's even in the mix, but I mean that type of big numbers where you say, wow, Cam Akers having a hell of a season. And Alabama State, while not a bad team, they do play in the Southwest, the SWAC Conference, which is one of the lower divisions in the FCS. They've played reasonably well this year. They've got blown out at times. They lost to Auburn, though, 63-9. They lost to Troy by 27. Now, they kept it close against UAB this year, but this is a Florida State team that I think is ready to finish the season strong. They still need 1 win to get to a bowl, and it is their final home game, so I would expect Higgins has his team rolling. I'm going to lay the 40.5. My computer says to do so, and I think there's enough motivation and enough fourth quarter stuff we got going for us where I'm going to lay the 40.5 with Florida State. We'll take a look at another one. Remember last week I gave you Army over UMass. Well, this week we're going to take a look at VMI, and they are taking on, Army. Yeah, we're going to take a look at Army again. And while UMass is a FBS team and VMI is a FCS team, the spread's pretty reasonable. It's under 5 touchdowns. Right now, Army's just a 34.5 point favorite in this game. Now, if you're Army, you came into the season with super high expectations. You're thinking, we're going to possibly be that team that gets a New Year's Day bowl. I mean, this was an Army team that if you look at how they finished last year, they won double-digit games. I believe they were 11-2 last year. and their only losses were to Duke and Oklahoma by 7. Hopkins back at QB. They had a lot of good things going for them this year, but it played Michigan tough, only lost by 3. Had been playing okay early, and then lost to Tulane, lost to Western, lost to Georgia State. Once again, Dan Ellington playing. Georgia State's a very dangerous team. San Jose State, they lose to by 5. And Air Force. Now, one thing I want to point out, this Air Force game was pretty good. At the end of the game, they had a 1st and goal inside the Air Force 10-yard line, chance to score in the game and win it. Air Force, a really good Mountain West team. They're probably the second best team in the Mountain West this year, next to Boise. And they only lost to them by that. Look at the average game grade, a 97.7. And then last week, they took care of business against UMass. And this was an offense that was frustrated. They needed to get rolling. They had been averaging about 4.5 yards per carry, which is highly unusual for Army. And last week, they got to the 6.4. Well, if you take a look at VMI, you can see that VMI traditionally, pretty weak rush defense. Last year, 265, 5.5. They played Toledo. They got beat 66-3 by Toledo. This year, they played Marshall. They got beat 56-17. Give up a high amount of yards rushing, 5.0 yards per carry. In fact, in the last 4 weeks, look at these red numbers here. After they played a good game against the Citadel, they gave up 238 yards per game and 5.2 yards per carry. Now, that's against Samford, Mercer, Western Carolina, and Furman. That is not against Army. And look at these pass attempts that those teams had, 47, 34, 23, 28. Army's going to run the football a lot more. So you can expect big numbers here for Army's rushing offense, which is getting going. And remember, they're not even bowl eligible. They only have 4 wins. They need to beat VMI. They need to beat Hawaii and beat Navy just to get to 7-6 this year. I think now if they've got the offense going, they're going to keep it going. And defensively, this was a defense that had a lot of pride last year. They gave up 296 yards per game. This year it hasn't been the same. They've been giving up some yards. Last week, they held UMass to 125 yards. So the defense is feeling it. You look at the average game grade the last 4 weeks, 86.9. Look at the average game grade for VMI the last 4 weeks, 44.8. Now, right there, that's a 42.1 difference. Add in the home edge. You're looking at 46.1 if you give Army a 4-point home edge. And once again, the spread's less than 5 touchdowns. It's only 34.5. So add it all up, I think you have a hungry Army team with the defense, with the offense, and I love green rushing numbers against red rushing defense numbers. That means you're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, so that's always a big plus. And look at this, VMI's given up 27 sacks this year. I think Army can get some pressure on the quarterback. You know, last year they had 26 sacks. And this year they only have 16. I think they're going to start getting that going. They had 3 sacks last week against UMass. And this is an Army team that can dominate. I pointed out last week when I talked about the UMass, I said it's probably going to be similar to that bowl game where they beat Houston 70-14. They just kept laying it on and scoring every time they had the ball. It got close. It wasn't 70-14. It was only 63-7 last week. Expect a similar score this week against VMI. Go ahead and lay the 34.5 with Army. Now, I'll be back with you on Friday. I'll have the Phil Steele Plus tour, take you around the site, show you how to use it, and get you some free selections. Last week, the free selections overall, 6-2-1. So it was a solid winning week here for the Phil Steele Plus tour, and I'll have that back for you Friday with your second edition. I appreciate you getting here. And remember, when you go to Phil Steele Plus, what I want you to do, make sure that you, on the YouTube video, you click on it and you subscribe right here. It's absolutely free. We go ahead and hit the bell. We'll notify you when the next one's up. Give me a like. Again, we'll keep this stuff absolutely free for you all the time. And I'll be back with you on Friday morning. Thanks for watching, taking the Phil Steele Plus tour.